Hello and thank you for joining me for episode number 7 of Mike Drinks a Beer. Today I'm going to be drinking Flat 12 Beer Works Walkabout Pale Ale. Flat 12 Beer Works is based in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I like to drink beers that are as local to me as possible, so they're just a few hours south and always happy to drink an Indiana beer. Like I said, this is an American Pale Ale. It comes in at 5.3% alcohol by volume, so it's not particularly strong. It's not going to knock you out if you have 2 or 3 of these. Just going to drink this out of a regular old pint glass. This is from the 72nd Annual Senior PGA Championship. Okay, so you'll notice that it doesn't have a whole lot of a head to it, maybe a fourth of an inch, a little over a fourth of an inch. It's a nice pale gold color. It's kind of, I don't know, maybe peach, maybe on the browner side of peach, but copper, maybe that's a better word for it. It's a light coppery color, so that's what we're looking at. Let's give it a sniff. The hops are really noticeable in this beer. This features a strand of hops known as Galaxy hops. They come from Australia, so it's not entirely local. It's brewed in Indianapolis, but the hops themselves are Australian. The hops come out, but also a lot of citrus. It's not exactly clear what that citrus is. The website description for this beer says it's passion fruit. Not eating a whole lot of passion fruit myself, I couldn't really tell you. But there's definitely some citrus on the nose there, and it does smell good and bitter. It's not over the top with the bitterness, and if you can take a little bit, this is going to be just fine for you. Let's give it a shot. This is one of the few beers where the scent and the flavor align almost exactly perfectly together. So often you smell a beer and the things that you smell don't come through on the palate whatsoever. That's not the case here. What you smell is what you taste, and that's a really good thing with this beer because it tastes amazing. It does have that bitterness, and actually, I would say probably a little bit more bitterness than you would think by smelling it. So there is a little bit of bitterness there, but the citrus, that passion fruit, and actually, I would say peach comes through really strongly. Let's try it again. The citrus is just sweet enough to give this a little bit of body, but it's a really good hot weather beer, which is why I chose it for today. The mouthfeel is relatively dry. We've talked about that before. How do you figure out if something tastes dry? And if you try this beer, you'll know what I'm talking about. It just leaves a little bit of an astringent feeling in your mouth, which is actually a good thing. When you're drinking a beer in warm weather, you want it to clean the palate. You don't want it to hang around for a really long time because that's just too heavy, and it's not fun to drink like that in hot weather. As you can tell, the head is really going down quite a bit. We're down to about an eighth of an inch, sticking around a little bit on the sides of the glass, but nothing crazy. So it's not too foamy, it's not too light and airy, but at the same time, it's not particularly heavy. I think if you don't give it a whole lot of time to sit around on your tongue either, you're really going to get that sweetness that comes out through the citrus, which is really, really good. I like this beer a whole lot right now. This is very cold. I just got out of the fridge, so it's still relatively low in temperature. So I'm going to let it sit here for a few minutes. We'll see what happens when it warms up. Right now, I love this beer. Let's see what happens when it gets a few degrees warmer. Okay, so we've given the beer a few minutes to warm up. As you can see, I've taken a pretty healthy chunk out of this. And I do notice one particular change over time with this beer. That sweet fruity note does come down just a little bit. It's not quite as sweet, not quite as citrusy as it was before. At the same time, the bitterness is also a little bit more subdued. Not a whole lot, but a little bit more. I think overall it just sort of flattens out over as the temperature rises a little bit. And I don't mean to say that it becomes flat as far as taste goes. As you can tell, even though the head went away pretty quickly, it still has retained a little bit of some. There's some lacing up here. So there is definitely still a little bit of foam on top of this beer, which indicates that it's still plenty carbonated. Really, what that flattening of flavors means is that this beer is more or less ideally suited to hot weather. And by that I mean it's meant to be drunk cold. It's going to taste the best when it's cold. And obviously when it's hot outside, you want to drink something that's cold. You're not going to want to let it warm up too awfully quickly. Which is good that this beer is relatively low as far as alcohol goes, because you can drink this relatively quickly and you're not going to end up feeling like you've had 5 or 6 of some other beer. It's not going to knock you off your feet. This is actually my second favorite beer of all time. I knew that going into this because I drank it before. This is the one that I mentioned in the last episode that I wanted to get to pretty quickly. I'm not going to say what my favorite one is. I'm going to review it one day and I'll reveal it at the end if I can ever get a hold of it. It's hard to find. But if I do, I'll certainly review it. But this is a really good beer. It's got a nice balance of hoppiness, bitterness, and flavor. The citrus flavors in this, I think, are just fantastic. I know that Flat 12 themselves say that it's mostly passion fruit, and I can see that to some extent, even though I don't eat passion fruit. But I think peach is there to be sure, maybe a little bit of really, really sweet orange. But I think overall the flavors in this beer are just really, really good, and I can't recommend it highly enough. Surely if you're in Indiana, you can find this beer, and I would imagine that it's distributed a little bit beyond the state as well. So I do recommend this. If you see it, it's absolutely worth trying. As always, drink responsibly. Don't drink and drive. If you've had a few too many, call a friend, call a family member, call a cab, and get home safely. Don't drive drunk. But until then, drink responsibly and cheers.